رحم الله من سورة البارقة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله، روحي وجسمي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء، يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد بأرض كربلاء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أقيموا الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا. صلوا على محمد وآله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's just one or two points that I need to finish from yesterday's majlis because time was running short. I could not finish, and then I want to proceed to today's topic. But one of the issues again which is continuously being asked is that of the question of washing of the feet. As you are aware, in our madhab, in our school of law, although we can wash the feet before the salat, there is no harm in it, but it's not part of the salat. The masah, what we call masah, which literally means to wipe, has to be done on the foot, not on the socks. Unless, of course, there is it's so cold that you cannot take off your shoes or socks. But the verse that is referred to is in the Quran itself, and it's pretty easy to remember. Chapter 5, verse 6. وَاغْسُلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. The Quran says, wash your faces and your hands to the elbow. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. And wipe your heads and your feet to the knuckle bone, as is called, the Ka'bayn, which is right here. So the verse in the Quran clearly separates two aspects of it. The washing, وَاغْسُلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, that wash your faces and your hands with, rather than to, the proper translation should be with your elbows. And then it says, and then he continues, wipe your heads, which is, that's why we have a bit of the hair, and your feet. But other Muslims have combined the wiping of the feet with the washing of the feet, with the earlier part of the verse. Hence you get this discrepancy. But in reality, when you look at the verse in the Quran, as I say, it's pretty easy to remember. Chapter 5, verse 6. It is pretty clear what the Quran is saying. Hence we follow that. It's not merely a question of differentiating from the other. It's actually trying to follow as far as clearly as possible to the statements in the Quran and the practices of the Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. My topic for tonight is part of the earlier topic that I've been discussing, Islam in the diaspora. And more specifically, how have we fared in America, having been here for quite a bit of time. Many of us do not realize that Muslims have been in America for a very long time. We tend to think that it's a new phenomenon. The first Muslim that we know for sure came to America was in 1517. Esteban was his name. Morisco was someone coming from Spain on those on the ships of Columbus, Christopher Columbus. Although we do not know much about him, he apparently is buried in Florida. But it's clear that it's a long history. And of course, even the African slaves who were brought here in the 18th and 19th centuries, many of them were Muslims. You've all heard, I think, of Kunta Kinte. Kunta Kinte was a Muslim. We know they were Muslims because they kept slave registers. And when you read the slave registers, you hear of names like Omar bin Sa'id, Al-Bilali, Ibrahima, Yaro Marut, and so on. Clearly all Muslim names. In some cases, we even have their biographies. We have details of who these people were. And they clearly identified themselves as Muslims. Some time back, a few years ago, I remember there was a documentary on PBS called Prince Among Slaves. Some of you may have seen it. Prince Among Slaves is about the history and the biography of a prince in West Africa. Ibrahima was his name, who was captured into slavery and then brought over here. So there were clearly Muslims in the slave period, although they could not build mosques. Islam did not survive the post-slavery period simply because they were not able to sustain Islam. Some of them were forcibly converted. Some of them went back to Africa. But what we find is soon after slavery ends, a new kind of Islam starts, which is the immigrant Islam. In fact, immigrant Muslims have been here since the 1870s. So it's a long history. It's nothing new. One of these was a person by the name of Haji Ali. And he happened to go, of all places, to Texas. Now, as you may be aware, some Texans cannot pronounce names properly. Nuclear, they call it nuclear, and so on. But in this particular case, the people in Texas could not pronounce Haji Ali at all. And therefore, his name reads as Hi Jolly. If you Google, if you think I'm joking, just type in Hi Jolly, and you'll see him. His actual name was Haji Ali, a camel breeder, ended up in Texas, in Arizona finally, a place called Quartzsite, I believe. He's buried there. And if you enter the cemetery in Quartzsite, it says Hi Jolly was buried here. His actual name was Haji Ali. Amongst these early migrants were Shias too. They were coming at that time, there was no Lebanon, from Greater Syria, Bint Tibnin, Bint Jibail, Tibnin, and so on. Those are the areas. In fact, we know that even on the Titanic, for sure, there were at least 3 Shias, if not more. I know this because I've written about it in my book, Shiism in America. I'm not trying to market it, I don't get any money out of it, but it's called Shiism in America. And we know for sure because one of these survived. One of the Shias, her name was Fatima Masalmani. She survived because she was a woman, therefore she could board the boats. And she survived and ended up in the Michigan area. In fact, she died in 1971. And her niece, also called Fatima, has been emailing me about the story of her aunt. Why I'm mentioning this is because to show that Islam and Shiism in America has a long history behind it. It's not a new phenomenon. In fact, we might be surprised to know that the second earliest mosque was built by the Shias in America. You would have thought that the Ahlus Sunnah built it, etc., because they had a longer period of history here. But the second mosque that was built in America was built by the Shias in a place called Michigan City. And this is the confusing part. Michigan City is not in Michigan. You would think it would be in Michigan. It's actually in Indianapolis. It was built in 1917. In fact, we know that there was a group called Badrul Munir, which was formed in 1914 by the Shias, and they built this mosque. I have a whole list of their articles in Constitution, etc. We've been able to locate them. That goes to show, and then there's a whole history of the Shia presence here. We got Imam Shirri, who came in 1949, and as I say, a whole history of Shia presence in America for a long time. The question that arises is us having stayed here in the diaspora, in North American diaspora in particular, how have we fared? What have we done? For a long time, as I said, Muslims were passive, simply because our presence here was seen as just to try and make quick bucks and perhaps maybe send some money home. We always imagined for a long period in the 1950s and 1960s that one day we'll go home. Well, now Home is right here in Los Angeles or wherever we live now. This has become home. Especially since the events of 9/11, Muslims have felt the need to demythify Islam. For a long time, Islam was seen as this mythical, oriental, exotic religion. But Islam is as exotic as Christianity or Judaism is. Because Islam began in the Middle East, it did not begin in Pakistan. The same place where Judaism began, where Christianity began, Islam began at the same place. And therefore, one of the challenges for Muslims especially is to demythify Islam, to make Islam a Western phenomenon. The West always talk of our Judeo-Christian culture, if you've noticed. But why not the Islamic culture? Because Muslims have been here as long as the Jews have. The Jews came around the 19th century, some of them a bit earlier. Muslims came around the same time. But because of our lack of perhaps penetration into the mainstream American society, we've always been marginalized. It is only 9/11 that created a wake-up call for us. In fact, in many ways, 9/11 made us transit. Before, we were Muslims in America. We were Muslims in America. After 9/11, we became American Muslims because we accentuated and emphasized our American identity, not only our Islamic identity. And there's nothing wrong in that, by the way. We are Muslims and we are Americans. There's nothing wrong in that. In fact, soon after 9/11, I recall there was an advert placed by CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. I think it was in the New York Times, although I cannot be sure of which newspaper. And you know, it said there was a picture of a woman in hijab, fully clad in hijab, and it said, "I'm an American, I'm a Muslim." And the American came before Muslim. That showed of us showing that we are as American as anybody else. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. In these 80s, in the 90s, Muslims in America were always concerned excuse me, about American foreign policy. Now, especially since 9/11, we are concerned not only about American foreign policy, because also of American domestic policies. What happens in America impacts us, impacts our children. And if you think that, maybe I'm exaggerating, look at Canada. Today, this past week, in fact on Monday, large sections of the Muslim population voted in Canada. And you know what happened? We overthrew Harper. Alhamdulillah. Huh? I can say that here in America. But because of his policies, his whole issue was that of niqab. Now, whether you feel, whatever you feel about the niqab, we also feel the freedom to wear and express yourself. We don't see niqab as part of religion, fine. But if a woman chooses to wear niqab, she should have the right to do so. Harper made some very derogatory and wrong comments about niqab issue, and Muslims were totally up in arms because of that. Now, it wasn't only the Muslim effort, I must make it clear. But in general, what we're trying to say is when Muslims really want to, they can exert a lot of leverage, a lot of influence. If you want to see what the future of Islam in the American diaspora is going to look like, then you should visit Detroit, more specifically Dearborn. I do not know whether you've heard of Dearborn, Detroit. The best baklava in America, I assure you. And if you don't believe me, you can just Google baklava.com. They will deliver it to your home. But in that area, in a small area, you have no less than 75,000 Shias. There's about 10, 15 Shia centers in about 5-6 mile radius. What is interesting is how the Shias have penetrated the mainstream American society. The judges, the police, the mayors, the councillors are Shias. And even the road streets, the names of the streets sometimes are in Arabic. Huh? What is interesting also to show you how we Muslims have moved on in North America, and specifically in America, the elder generation, as I say, Muslims have been, especially in Detroit, this is the third generation of Muslims. The elder generation who may have come in the 1920s, 1930s, who still survive, they assimilated themselves to American society. Assimilation, many of us want to say that we want to assimilate. Assimilation is a wrong term. Assimilation means to be at one with, sometimes to lose track of your identity, your culture, in order to be accepted by the mainstream society. If you recall, when the British came to our countries, John always remained John. He never changed his name to suit us. Elizabeth was always Elizabeth. Why do we need to change our names to suit them? But the elder generation of Muslims did that. When I was writing my book, I remember I spent 3-4 days interviewing the locals there, who were many of them in these 50s, 70s, 80s. And when you talk to them, their names was Haji John, Haji Paul, Haji Elizabeth. These were Muslim Shias, Haji Chak. And the younger generation, interesting, the younger generation did not change their name. Said Muhammad will remain Muhammad, Ali will remain Ali. We do not need to change our names and our identity to suit the others. On the contrary, because of the force and because of the influence of the younger generation, the elder generation of Muslims came back towards Islam. This is what I found, that the elder generation were ashamed that why should we change our identity, our names to suit others. They came back and more forcefully towards Islam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Muslims have realized then, especially since 9/11, that we must speak with rather than about the other. Our language has changed also. When I say the language has changed, I don't mean from English or Arabic to English or Swahili, whatever, no. What I mean to say is how we converse. Before, our language was that of conversion. Brother, become a Muslim, or do this, therefore you'll become a good Muslim and Allah will reward you. No. Since then, our language has moved from that of conversion to that of conversation. In other words, now we have realized that we have to stop converting them, we have to start conversing with them. Rather than talking about them, we need to talk with them. Remember this much, my sisters and brothers, that the heart of Islam is the Islam of the heart. The heart of Islam is the Islam of the heart. Rather than reducing Islam to the do's and don't do's that we have done for a long time, the only way to appeal to the wider spectrum of even non-Muslim society, non-Muslims in America, is through the heart of Islam, which is the Islam of the heart. A group which has actually been able to penetrate North American society to a large degree are the mystics of Islam, the Sufis. If you followed, you will see very clearly. I remember a long time ago, I was driving in New Mexico. I don't even know whether you want to drive in New Mexico because it is almost deserted. And right in the middle, I saw a mosque. I was astonished. A mosque in the middle of the desert. I went there, and to my astonishment, there was a whole village there in New Mexico, all of them Muslims. These were all converts to Islam in a place called Albuquerque. Albuquerque in, not Albuquerque, Albuquerque in New Mexico. And these were the Sufis. They were the mystics of Islam. It is the Islam of the heart that has actually appealed to the North American society. In fact, the most widely read poet in America is Rumi today. Rumi is the most widely read poet in America. What I'm trying to say is we need to have changed our way of reaching out to non-Muslims. This is what we call the indigenization of Islam. Indigenization means to consider Islam an indigenous phenomenon, an American phenomenon. For a long time, whatever we wanted to do, our programming, our mosque, our centers, our curriculum was all based on back home phenomenon, That we used to do this back home, we'll do the same thing here. We used to do matam this way, we'll do it here. If it works, that's fine. But if it doesn't work, then you have to make it an indigenous phenomenon. Indigenization of Islam means to carve our own space in American society, to appreciate American values while remaining authentic to Islam itself. Because one of the key things of these evangelical Christians and the conservative Americans are trying to say is that Islam is not compatible with the American Constitution. As you've been aware, this guy Carson who says that you should never vote a Muslim as president unless he relinquishes or abandons the Sharia, he wouldn't dare say that about the Jews. Huh? He says that about Muslims simply because we have given this impression that Islam is not compatible with American values. On the contrary, there is nothing, mark these words, my sisters and brothers, there is nothing in the American Constitution which violates Islam. Read the Constitution carefully. When it's talking of freedom, justice, equality of all, Islam says the same thing. There is nothing in the American Constitution which contradicts Islam. Yes, we may disagree with some of their values, some of their cultures. Those are things that we cannot make compromises of. Their liberality, their promiscuity, and so on, their sexuality, etc. But we can appreciate the American values, yet remain authentic to Islam. And many immigrants seem to think that if you adopt aspects of American values, that means you are no longer a proper Muslim. In other words, in this immigrant Islam phenomenon that I was talking about earlier, that in order to be a good Muslim, you have to be a good Pakistani, or you have to be a good Arab. I remember youth sometimes come and tell me, says, my daddy sends me to Pakistan in the summer. I said, why does he send you to Pakistan in the summer? So that I can become a good Muslim. As if Islam resides in Pakistan. I said, he's sending you to Pakistan not to be a good Muslim, but to be a good Pakistani. Because Islam is in your heart, it's not in Pakistan. You can be the perfect kafir in Mecca and be the best Muslim in Timbuktu. Because Islam depends on who you are, not where you are. Islam depends on who you are, not where you are. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. We should not see America or the outside world as a threat. Because when we see the outside world as a threat, we seek excuses rather than solutions. We as Muslims need to seek solutions, not excuses. We should not be scared or be fearful of the other. This indigenization of American Islam, as I was saying, does not mean the Arabization or the Indianization of Islam. The Prophet did not come here to Arabize us. He did not come here to Indianize us. He came here to make us good human beings, to make human beings who can live wherever we are as good Muslims. So, as I said, Indianization then is an internal process, a process that we Muslims in America have to work out, rather than depending on some outsider coming and tell us how we should live, how we should fold our trousers, and how much beard, length of our beard, and the shape of our hijab. This is what the outsiders do, that if you sit on the carpet putting your one hand this way, and so much you'll go into hells of layer, and so on. Things that frankly are alien to Islam itself. It is also important, and I'll talk more about this inshallah tomorrow, that we should re-examine how we apply Islam in the diaspora, meaning is the position of Islamic law in the diaspora. What we have done for a long period is that almost on everything we've written to a marja outside, as if we cannot think on our own. Huh? Remember, my sisters and brothers, Islam has come to liberate our minds, not to freeze our minds. We're not supposed to be just bound by history. We are supposed to learn from history. To the extent, and this I can document it, I assure you, the people from America have written to Ayatollah this and Ayatollah that, can we steal from non-Muslims? Can we cheat on gas meters, the things that Muslims think of? Apparently they have gas meters that you can cheat, or swindle of. God knows. I'm thinking that where is the ethical categories or ethical Islam that we are talking of? And the response came, no, you cannot cheat anybody. You cannot swindle the IRS. You can't do anything of that sort because Islam requires you. The moment you sign your signature on the form, whether it is the American visa or American passport, that I agree to abide by the laws of the country, you are bound by the laws of that country, whether it is America or wherever you live. This is what our Maraji have taught us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Therefore, we need to distinguish between what we call religious norms and historical forms. By that I mean to say that we need to distinguish between the Quranic Islam and the historical Islam. Many a time we tend to think we are following Islam, but what we do follow is the historical construction, how Muslims have understood Islam, rather than what is coming out from the Quran. And I will give you an example. When people talk, and you hear this all the time, there is no democracy in Islam. I don't know, it has to be wilayatul faqih and this and that. Where is the question of the khilafat in the Quran? The Quran talks of khilafat, but we are all caliphs of God in the Quran. There is no question of the khilafat, the historical institution, as it was developed by the Muslims in the Quran. In fact, when Ataturk abandoned the Khilafah, there was an outcry as if he had abandoned Islam. Ataturk in Turkey, he abolished the Khilafah in 1924 because he felt that it had absolutely no value at all. The Caliph was a burden rather than an asset to the Muslim community. And when the Muslim protested, he said, okay, you can have him then, you keep the Khilafah. We don't need it here. Why should we finance the Caliph? Because he was just a symbol of unity, in many cases, disunity. But when you look at the whole concept of the Khilafat, it doesn't exist in the Quran. This was a historical institution that Muslims created after the wafat of the Prophet because it suited them best. But what we did was we raised this historical institution to the divine level. So much so, at one time, that if you even criticize, let alone abuse, criticize the Caliph is as if you criticize God himself. In other words, the Caliph was called the shadow of God. I'm talking about our history. You read some of our history, you'll say, Dhillullah. God has a shadow? What kind of shadow does God have? The Khalifa was addressed and known as the shadow of God. But this was all, as I say, a fable created by Muslims. We have elevated the historical experience of Muslims to a religious form. Therefore, we have to distinguish between the religious norms and the historical form. Or to put it differently, whereas the Quranic Islam encourages and even requires us to think, the historical Islam says, don't think, we'll think for you. The Quranic Islam wants us to express ourselves, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief. This is the Quranic Islam. Historical Islam says the opposite. The Quranic Islam liberates and frees women. Historical Islam does the opposite. And that's why I said we need to go back to the history of the Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As Muslims living in the diaspora then, and especially after the events of 9/11, what has happened is that it has drawn, the events of 9/11 has drawn Muslims into conflict with each other, right here in America. Because Muslims have realized that the voices of the silent majority have been drowned by the bombs of the violent minority. The majority have been silent of Muslims, whereas the minority, because of their violence, have spoken very loudly. In the process, the thing that has suffered most is the Quran itself, by the way. Because these Christian fundamentalists have drawn passages from the Quran and said, look how volatile and how violent your document is. And Muslim fundamentalists, those who actually want to perpetrate acts of violence, have also drawn on the same verses. Islam says, kill them where you find them. He says, kill them, but kill who? Those who are attacking you, those who are killing you. They forget the context. Because of that, you will recall how even the Quran was burned by that pastor in Florida. You remember it all. We Muslims have to make it very clear that every scripture has a particular context. I can give you examples after examples in the Old Testament, which is far more violent than the Quran itself. The Old Testament is far more violent, whereby Moses, na'udhu billah, is recorded as telling the Midians, go and kill every single little creature that you see in that village. Not only just people, anything which is moving, kill it. Indeed, in the Old Testament, God is the terrorist. When Joshua enters Jericho, he kills not only men and women, he kills every little thing. In the Old Testament we are talking of. The most anti-Semitic book is the New Testament, where John compares the Jews with the devils. Tell me, where in the Quran does it say like that? On the contrary, the Quran tells us the opposite, that if you save one human being, you save the whole of humanity. Yet we see such verses. The old traditional Jews, not the reform-minded, the conservative or traditional Orthodox Jews, when a man wakes up, an Orthodox Jewish man, when he wakes up, you know the dua that he recites? The dua is, oh God, thank you for not making me a slave, and thank you for not making me a woman. Now, I don't know if any of you recite that. There is no dua in Islam which says, don't make me, thank you for not making me a woman. And yet we are told that we are anti-women. In the Old Testament, I can give you other examples too. I don't want to go too far because the time is running out. But in the Old Testament, if a Jew was to work on the Sabbath, he will be stoned to death. Where do you have this if we are going to compare, then we have to compare the ideals with the ideals, the realities with the realities. What many Christians do, the Jews do, is to compare their ideals with our realities. If we compare, we must compare oranges with oranges, not oranges with apple. When we do that, we find that Islam has been far more tolerant. In fact, Islam has actually protected the Jewish community. Historically, the Jews have fared far better under Muslim rule than under Christian rule. Because of the concept of the Ahlul Kitab in the Quran, there are two types of Jews. To give you an example of Islamic perspective of the other, something that we need to explain to non-Muslims. There are Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazim Jews. Sephardic Jews are the Mediterranean Jews. Ashkenazim are the European Jews. When you compare their experiences, you will see that the Sephardic Jews who lived under Muslim rule in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, in Spain, fared far better than the Ashkenazim Jews. The Ashkenazim Jews experienced the pogroms in France, in Czechoslovakia. They experienced the Holocaust. They were tortured, many a time murdered, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in Russia, and so on. Those Jews living under Muslim rule in the Mediterranean never experienced that. In fact, when Muslims captured Turkey in 1493, the Jews actually welcomed the Muslims, saying that we know that you will treat us better than these Christians have done. I'm not trying to score points on anybody, but I'm trying to explain for those who have demonized Islam that in fact it's been historically the opposite has happened. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. My sisters and brothers, it is time as Muslims that we speak up for ourselves in this diaspora. Otherwise, others will speak about us. When you look at the media, you all know the influence of the media. Whenever they want to portray or a cartoon of a Muslim, have you noticed that? He's never, a Muslim is one who is a CEO dressed in a tie and a suit. Never. He's always some Pakistani guy or some Arab guy looking ferocious, with a long beard and a kufi and so on. As if there are no Muslims in America. Whenever they want to portray a Muslim woman, she's having those Ninja Turtle hijab, She is never properly dressed as a Muslim woman in America. Why? Because these are the stereotypes that they create, the media creates. Even in movies, the only good Muslim in the movies is an invisible one. There is a movie called The Siege. I have not seen it. But when I read about it, what astonished me was this. There are two kinds of Muslim in that movie. One who works with the law enforcement, with the FBI, and he's the one who's smartly dressed and is always with the FBI, and the other one is a terrorist. And the one who is a terrorist, before he commits acts of terror, Allahu Akbar. In other words, they're telling us that a good Muslim is one who doesn't practice Islam, whereas a bad Muslim is one who practices and then kills other people. Those are the kinds of stereotypical images that are being bombarded to the West and to the Muslims themselves. As Muslims then, and there are so many other challenges which time does not permit me to get into, especially as Shias within the American community, American Muslim community, it is time that we become more proactive. You come to the academia. There are within North America, the whole of North America, there are 10, maximum 15 Shia scholars, maximum, teaching in the universities. For the longest time, Islam in the universities was taught by Baha'is, by Jews, and by Christians. How come we don't teach them about their religion? They come and teach us about ours. Since the 1990s, things have changed, by the way. There are a lot of Muslim scholars now, most of them Ahlul Sunnah. But we within the community do not even value our own scholars. That's why we don't produce scholars. We don't produce politicians, we don't produce journalists, and therefore we become voiceless. We are invisible rather than visible Muslims. It is only now that we have created the Imam Ali Chair in Islamic Studies at Hartford, Connecticut, which is a good start. But this is only the basis of what must come later on. As I said, we go to the Maraji rather than developing our own scholarship here. And I want to finish with this part and go to the Masaib, because we seem to don't want to think. We have created within the community, I'm told that within the Shia community, Khoja Shias, there are no less than 150 youth studying in Qom, which is great. 150 of our youth are studying in Qom, but most of them want to stay there. They want to stay there. Okay, once they stay there, they become mujtahid. What are they going to do? When they come back here, do we have a place for them? My other issue is this. To me, a good scholar who wants to relate to and connect with the Muslim community here in America must have a proper grounding of both the East and the West. That is the studies in Qom and the studies here in America. By just training them there, we're going to create more Qummis, people from Qum, or Najafis, rather than creating them Americanized Muslims. Americanized Muslim does not mean that we sell ourselves to America. On the contrary, it means to be aware of the issues facing the American Muslim community here, and then being able to resolve those issues. I gave you the example of our youths meeting each other. We don't allow that, then what happens? The youth marry outside. And to give you an example of how we need to re-evaluate our fiqh, our laws in the American context. Instead of thinking things through, almost everything we want to write with a marja. Oh, can I donate my organ? And the answer comes, you cannot donate your organ to a non-Muslim. You can take an organ from a non-Muslim, but you can only give it to a Muslim. And then we propagate such things here on our website. What do you think the world is going to see? That we have double standards? On many issues, as I said, our books need to be updated. And I can give you an example before I move on. You read our fiqh books and they tell us how to treat a slave. I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about 30, 40 years ago. What ISIS is doing, taking slaves, they can point to their books and our books too. They will tell us that, well, a slave girl does not have to wear hijab in the streets because she's a slave girl. She doesn't even have to wear hijab when she's praying. When I said this to some people, some guy told his wife, why don't you become my slave? Then you don't have to wear hijab at all. These are the kind of things that we are confronted with today. My sisters and brothers, it's time that we moved on. We cannot, for the sake of the younger generation, we need to update how we live here and what our future is, how we are going to use our laws, how we are going to shape our laws living in the diaspora. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It's the eve of the 8th of Muharram. And as we are aware, the water has been stopped in the house, in the tents of the Ahlul Bayt since yesterday. It's on the day of Ashur. It's a very, very touching moment for me at least, that as Imam Hussein is watching his army fight. His army was very small. And in fact, in the first major onslaught which occurred on the day of Ashur, some reports say that Imam Hussein lost as many as 50 people from his army. 50 was a lot for an army which was small. For the opposite army, even if they lost hundreds, it was not a big deal. There were so many of them. As Imam Hussein is watching the battlefield, somebody comes up to him, says, Yabna Rasulullah, I see that death is approaching. Death is coming towards us. And I will die in front of you. I will give my life for you. But I have one final request. Imam Hussein is looking at him. His name is Abu Thumama. Abu Thumama, what can I give you? Hussein doesn't have food. He doesn't have any water. He has no worldly possession. Abu Thumama says, Yabna Rasulullah, I see that the time for prayer has come. The time for prayer has come. My only wish is that you should lead us in prayer and we can pray behind you. At that time, Imam Hussein's face glowed that somebody had remembered the prayer at that very difficult and crucial moment. And the Imam Hussein says, جَعَلَكَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ الذَّاكِرِينَ قَدْ ذَكَرْتَ الصَّلَاةَ يَا أَبَا ثَمَامَ. You remember the prayers. May Allah make you amongst those who have remembered the prayers. Yes, tell them that Hussein wants to pray. And the answer comes from Shimr, Salat Hussein la tuqbal. The prayer of Hussein will not be accepted. One of the persons who was killed during this onslaught at Dhuhr time was a person by the name of Janada al-Khazraji. A person who was deeply devoted to Imam Hussein. He was there in Karbala with his wife, Bahira, and his young son, Amr. This Amr is a fascinating figure that we hardly ever hear about. Amr is 10 years old. He has just seen his father being killed. And yet after a little while, he comes to Imam Hussein, a 10-year-old boy, Amr. Says, Yabna Rasulullah, I want to give my life for you. Imam Hussein looks at him and says, Amr, your father has just died. Your mother needs you. How can you go? Jihad is not wajib on you. Go and talk to your mother. Amr says, Yabna Rasulullah, my mother sent me here. Not only did she send me here, she dressed me up for the battle. She put on my garments for me. She dressed me up for the battle and says, son, go and give your life for Hussein. As Amr comes to the battlefield, a 10-year-old is killed immediately. But what is so vicious about these people? Not only did they kill a 10-year-old boy, they cut off his head and threw the head to the mother in the tent. Our records tell us that threw the head of the young boy to the mother. The mother picked up the head and she says, Shabash, I am proud of you, my son, that you not only sacrificed, you gave your life for Hussein. The mother then picks up an iron bar and wants to go and fight. But Hussein stops her and she says, Oh Bahira, the jihad is not wajib on you. Azadarana Hussein. This is the night of Abbas. Abbas, the hero of Karbala. It is reported that when Ali was on his deathbed, he called everybody and gave their hands to Hassan, that Hassan will be your Lord. He'll be your master. Listen to what Hassan says. As Ali was doing that, he heard a lady cry. And Ali asked, who is crying? Ali is still alive. He was told that this is Ummul Baneen. Ummul Baneen says, Mawla, you forgot my Abbas. You have not given the Abbas's hand to the hand of Hassan. Imam Ali says, bring Abbas, come to me. Abbas came to Imam Ali. Imam Ali takes the hand of Abbas and puts it in the hand of Hussein. From today, O Abbas, Hussein is going to be your master. You follow what he says. Go wherever he goes. Do not disobey him, Ya Abbas. We say, Mawla. Abbas was truly faithful. Abbas was from a Qabila that was known for bravery, that was known for loyalty. It was known for courage. Azadarana Hussein. Abbas was 34 years old in Karbala. He had 5 children. He had 3 other brothers. On the eve of Ashur, Shimr, who was related to Abbas, he was related through al-Baneen. Shimr goes to the tent of Hussein and he says, I want to talk to my nephews, Abbas, Abdullah, Ja'far, and Uthman. All 4 of these brothers come in front of Shimr, and Shimr says, look, I do not wish to fight against you because you are related to me. I'm not asking you to come towards me. I'm just asking you to leave Hussein. If you leave Hussein, then I grant you amnesty. Abbas looked at Shimr and says, لعنك الله يا شمر ولعن أمانك. May God's curse be upon you, O Shimr, and curse be upon your amana. If you truly were our uncle, you would give the amana to Hussein first and then to us. We do not need your amana. Azadarana Hussein. Abbas is the one who's called the moon of Bani Hashim. He is the one who Hussein depends on so much. Because when the enemy come on the 9th of Muharram, it is Abbas who goes to confront them. When Hussein says on the eve of Ashura, Shabi Ashur, that, oh my companions, you may leave me now. I have removed the bay'ah from you. The first person amongst the Banu Hashim who stands up was this Abbas. Mawla, we will never leave you even if we are cut into pieces. How can we leave you? What will we answer Fatima tomorrow? How will we stand in front of the Prophet tomorrow? Abbas is the flag bearer of Hussein. When Hussein lines up his army on the day of Ashur, on the one side is Habib ibn Madahir, on the other side is Zuhair bin Qayn, and Abbas is in the middle, the flag bearer. On the day of Ashura, Zadar and Hussein, Abbas comes repeatedly to Hussein, "Oh Mawla, it is my turn to go and give my life for you. Let me go and give my life for you." Hussein says, "No, you cannot go, Abbas." Finally, when Abbas comes again, Hussein says, "You are the army of mine, the chief of the army. How can I let you go?" Abbas says, "Mawla, where is the army now? Where is the army now?" Hussein will not let Abbas go. Abbas goes to the tent. He hears the voices of little children. Al-Atash, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. He calls Sakina towards him. "Oh Sakina, you want water? Your uncle will bring you water. Bring me the musk, the water vessel. Your uncle will bring you water." Abbas comes to Hussein again, but this time with the musk of Sakina. Hussein looks at Abbas, looks at that water vessel and says, "Khuda hafidh ya Abbas, I cannot stop you anymore." Abbas and Hussein, they embrace on the plains of Karbala. Abbas is going towards the battlefield. He has that flag with him. Hussein is looking at Abbas. He's looking at the flag. Sakina, she is gathering all the children in front of the tent. "Oh children, I know my uncle will bring me water. I know he's very brave." Abbas enters the water. He enters into the river. Hussein is looking at the flag of Abbas. He knows now that Abbas is filling all the water vessels, the musk. Abbas now, he is human after all. He takes a bit of water. He is very thirsty. He wants to drink water, but he looks towards the tent. He sees Sakina and the children there. As long as Sakina does not taste water, Abbas will not drink water. Abbas tells the host, "Let's go now back to the tent." As Abbas is going towards the tent, Umar ibn Sa'd says, "Oh people, surround Abbas. That water must not get near the tent." They surround Abbas from all directions. Abbas says, "If you truly want to, why don't you come and fight me one by one?" No one can go close to Abbas. Abbas, and then somebody comes from the rear. He cuts one of the hands of Abbas. Abbas does not have the right hand now, and yet the horse is going towards the tent. Somebody comes and cuts the second hand of Abbas. Abbas is bleeding, but he's still going towards the tent. And finally Hormala fires that fateful arrow, which cuts right into the water vessel. The water is spilled on the ground. Abbas says to the horse, "There is no need to go to the tent anymore." Hi, the flag of Abbas falls down. Abbas goes on the ground. Imam as-Sadiq says, "Wow, my uncle Abbas, he had so many arrows from his body that when he fell on the ground, he could not even put his hand on the ground because he had no hand. He fell on the arrows which were in his body." When Hussein says that the flag of Abbas is down. It does not come up again. Hussein, for a little while, he could not even see properly. Wa Abbasa, wa akha, oh my brother, oh Abbas, call out to me. Finally, Hussein, he goes to the body of Abbas. He sees that there is a spear in his eyes. He says, oh Abbas, open your eyes. Abbas says, Mawla, I cannot open my eyes because there is an arrow in it. Hussein takes out the arrow. Abbas, for the final time, opens his eyes. Hussein says, oh Abbas, forever you've always addressed me as your Mawla, as your Aka. Today, for the final time, address me as your brother. Oh, Abbas says, yeah, oh my brother, I will call you brother. But today also I have one final wasiyah. Hussein says, what is your wasiyah, oh Abbas? Abbas says, after I die, do not take my body to the tent. Do not take my body to the tent. Hussein says, why? Abbas says, I promised Sakina that I will bring water. I am ashamed that I could not bring water for her. Hi, Sakina is waiting near the tent. She sees the flag is coming back. She is telling the children, my uncle is coming back. The water is coming. She sees only her father is coming back. Sakina says, oh my father, where is my uncle Abbas? Where is Abbas? Hussein says, he's lying near the river. Sakina goes running to the lash of Abbas. Wa Amma, if I knew this is what they would do to you, I would never have asked for water. Azadar and Hussein have finished my majlis. But when the Ahlul Bayt go back to Medina, they go and give condolences to Banin. They tell her of how Hussein was killed. Banin says, oh, people tell me, when Hussein was killed, where was my Abbas? They say Abbas was killed before Hussein. Not only was he killed, but both his hands were cut off. Banin, she turns towards Karbala. Wa Abbas, you've done me proud. I can stand in front of Fatima to Zahra. Hi, when you go for ziyarat of Abbas, when you recite the ziyarat, you will see that Banin cried for Abbas so much. She would go to Jannatul Baqi and she would say, Wa Abbasa, law kana sayfuka fi yadik, lama dana ahadan. Oh Abbas, if your sword was in your hand, nobody could have come near you. Mata mein Hussein.